Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Centre for London's very first hybrid conference, Countdown to Net Zero London. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nick Bowes. I'm the still relatively new Chief Executive of Centre for London. I joined earlier this month after working for 5 years for the Mayor of London as his Director of Policy, and I had a previous career working in public policy, campaigns and public affairs. As my accent might reveal, I'm a northerner, and no, that doesn't mean I'm from Barnet or Enfield. It means I'm from Yorkshire. But I've lived in London for 21 years, and now I'm firmly a Londoner, and I love the city that I call my home. I'm delighted to be speaking to you today live, not from my spare room in Lewisham, but from KPF's offices in the heart of Covent Garden. Being here in the heart of central London feels strange. After so many months working from home, venturing into central London has an almost exotic feel to it. Commuting when the tubes and trains continue to be so quiet is also a very weird experience. The absence of the usual crowds of workers and tourists on the streets around Covent Garden shows just how much further there is to get London moving again after the pandemic. I'm joined here today at KPF by my colleagues who will be chairing today's sessions. Throughout the day, we'll be hearing from our other speakers wherever they are in the world. And of course, hearing from you, our audience who are joining us via Hopin today. Hopin is new to us and it might be new to you too. Hopefully you've already received the information about how Hopin works in the joining instructions. But if you have any difficulties, you can contact our team via the chat or by emailing events@centreforlondon.org. I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage you to join our networking sessions in the lunchtime break and at the end of the day. If there's something we're missing from in-person events, it's bumping into people in the conference hall and making those new connections. But here in Hopin, you can do just that. So give it a go and you might even bump into me. So now the logistics are out of the way, I'd like to turn to the important question that we want to discuss with you today. How exactly is London going to meet its ambitious net zero carbon emission target? The need to take climate action has risen up the policy agenda in recent years. Just 2 years ago, in 2019, Parliament, the Mayor of London and most London boroughs declared a climate emergency. Activists such as Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg drew attention to this urgency in their own different ways. It looked like extensive action to tackle climate change, at least in the UK, was within our grasp. However, fast forward to March 2020, and the climate crisis was no longer the crisis at the front of policymakers' minds. Responding to the virus and its effects on our economy understandably became the immediately pressing focus. With more people staying at home, our streets emptied of cars and our skies of planes. At first, it felt like we didn't need to worry too much about carbon emissions, but this was never the reality. For many Londoners, being at home all day through the cold winter lockdown was unavoidable, but it did use a lot of heat from gas boilers. And although air travel is nowhere near as high as it was before the pandemic, car use is almost back to pre-pandemic levels. Traffic from vans and lorries remains high as online orders increase, and the number of journeys made by public transport has fallen sharply. Perhaps more fundamentally, the pandemic has caused us to take our foot off the accelerator as we work to reduce carbon emissions and respond to the effects of global heating. New polling for Centre for London by Savanta, which we've published this week, shows that as we begin to open up our economy, Londoners are incredibly concerned about the effect that climate change could have both on their local area and the city as a whole. 48% of Londoners regularly worry about the impacts of climate change on London, and 89% at least occasionally worry about its impact on their local area. These are not small numbers, and it's the younger generation, those aged between 16 and 34, or parents with children under 18, who are most likely to be worried about the effects of climate change. Now could be a moment for hope. There is a real chance to combine our work on coronavirus recovery with our work to make London a net zero city. London's leaders have ambitious targets. The mayor last year set out his ambitions for London to become a carbon neutral city by 2030. 28 out of 32 London boroughs have declared a climate emergency, and many businesses have also set their own goals to meet net zero carbon emissions by 2030. For London, the need for climate action is as pressing as anywhere, and arguably more so. We have 9 million residents, a city the size of small countries, and with carbon emissions to match. We are a city with a long history of the threat from flooding, particularly from the tidal Thames. Indeed, 1.3 million Londoners live and work in areas with flood risk. London is also a global leader. It's been the focus for moral leadership throughout time, from the suffragettes to the anti-apartheid movement, to more recently on its world-leading focus on air quality. What people think and do in our great city can influence the world. Today, we want to talk to you about what practical actions London can take to tackle the climate crisis. We have expert panels on three of the most central topics: building sustainable homes and neighbourhoods, decarbonising transport, and creating the workforce that we need to make change. After lunch, we'll also be hearing from the brilliant Kate Rayworth, who I'm sure will need no introduction for many of you. She'll be applying her donut economics theory to London's 2030 ambitions. At the end of the day, we'll hear from Susan Aitken, leader of Glasgow City Council, about their plans to reach net zero and what our two great cities can learn from each other as they gear up to host COP26 in the autumn. Before we start our first panel, I'd like to reflect a little further on those three key areas and how they interact to pique your interest in the sessions coming up. Transport is often seen as the biggest greenhouse gas problem and the easiest to fix. But there are big questions about exactly how we decarbonise. It's about electrifying passenger and freight vehicles, encouraging walking and cycling, putting in infrastructure for new forms of low-carbon micromobility like e-bikes and e-scooters, and encouraging public transport use. But how do we prioritise these? The challenges for housing and neighbourhoods are different. There is one major source of pollution, gas boilers, and only one way to stop it: to get rid of them and replace them with greener heat sources and better insulation. But doing this is much easier said than done, especially in London, where we have a large population living in complex blocks of flats, lots of private and social rental, and a huge chunk of housing that dates back to the days of Queen Victoria. These are big questions for us to address today about how we get the incentives right for people in different parts of the system and what types of buildings we focus on first. However we decarbonise our homes and transport, we need a skilled and experienced workforce. London has a good start here. We have brilliant schools, colleges and universities, and we've already seen from our survey results that Londoners, especially younger Londoners, worry about climate change. Many of them will want to make a difference through their career of choice. But we can't make green jobs happen only by thinking they're a good idea. We need to focus on investment, research, education for young people, and support with transition for people with established careers in high carbon sectors. And we'll be talking about this in our panel session on green jobs. I think this all shows that the issues we're working on are complex, and we're all going to need to work together. We at Centre for London want this to be your opportunity to discuss new ideas, insights, and immediate actions we can put into place to make London a net zero carbon city, one that works for all Londoners. We'll be hearing from international experts, economists, local policymakers, and business leaders about what they're already doing and want to do next to tackle the climate crisis. And we want to hear from you too. So please do share your thoughts in the chat, ask questions, and tweet along with the hashtag #LondonToZero. Before I hand over to our next session, I would like to thank the sponsors of today's conference, without whom this event would not have been possible. Thank you to our major sponsor, Uber, our supporting sponsors, KPF and the London Borough of Hounslow, and last but not least, our exhibiting partner, Living Streets. I'd also like to thank KPF again for hosting us at their offices today. And finally, thanks to all of my colleagues, particularly our fantastic events team, who are all behind the scenes making this day happen. They've put a brilliant program together and are working with a new platform, so please be patient with us during the day. And our conference today really is the main event today. There might be the smaller matter of a football match later, but this really is where the action is today. To kick off today's proceedings, I'd like to share a recorded message from Shirley Rodriguez, London's Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. Shirley will be introducing our first panel on decarbonising homes and neighbourhoods, which will be chaired by Centre for London's trustee, Sam Iwosho. I sincerely hope you enjoy today's conference. Thank you.